The sun had barely risen when I first noticed the envelope wedged into the frame of my front door. The HOA's official seal printed in faded black ink already told me what it was before I even touched it. After spending over 20 years serving this country across continents and combat zones, I had come to learn the weight of official notices. But this one felt different. Not heavier, not lighter, just wrong. I opened the envelope and read the letter. It was brief, condemning, and ridiculous. According to the HOA board, I was being fined $500 for violating the neighborhood code. My violation was proudly flying an American flag on a pole attached to the front of my porch. I stood there for a minute on my steps in my old service hoodie and boots trying to process what I had just read. It was surreal. I had fought in the desert heat of Iraq, the bitter cold of Afghanistan, the sweltering jungles of South America, and somehow right here in my own front yard in my own country I was facing something that felt even more absurd. A battle over my flag. I folded the notice and tucked it into the pocket of my jeans. The flag waved gently above me, catching the morning breeze. It was clean, well-maintained, not ragged or torn. There was no reason anyone should have had an issue with it. Except maybe for Karen. Karen Simmons lived 2 doors down in a house that looked more like a Pinterest project than a home. Plastic flowers and urns, trimmed hedges shaped like animals, white picket fence, no kids, no dogs, no real signs of life, just constant renovations to make the property look like a magazine cover. Karen was the kind of woman who reported neighborhood kids for skateboarding too loudly or called the tow truck on visitors who parked an inch past the curb. She had been on the HOA board for 5 years and was recently elected as president. That power went straight to her head. It didn't take long to find out she was behind the fine. The neighbor across the street, Mark, a good man with a loud laugh and a smoker's voice, had seen her taking pictures of my house the previous afternoon. He said she was standing on the sidewalk with her phone raised up like she was surveying a crime scene. "You know, she told my wife last week she doesn't think the flag fits the neighborhood vibe," Mark said, shaking his head over his coffee cup. "The vibe," he muttered with a snort. "It's the damn flag of the United States. What other vibe do you need?" That afternoon I attended the HOA board meeting. It was held in the community center, a beige building with flickering fluorescent lights and mismatched chairs lined up in crooked rows. About 20 people were there. Karen sat at the front behind a folding table with 2 other board members, a man named Rick who looked half asleep and a woman named Marlene who kept checking her phone. I waited patiently through the first few agenda items. Tree trimming schedule, sidewalk repairs, the usual bureaucratic stuff. Then Karen announced it. "Next up, we have an item of non-compliance issued to Mr. John Keller for displaying unapproved external decor on his residence," Karen said with a tight smile. "I'd like to invite Mr. Keller to respond if he's present." I stood up and cleared my throat. "I'm John Keller. The decor in question is the American flag on my front porch. It's mounted securely, not obstructing anything, and I believe I have every right to fly it." Karen's smile didn't fade. "Unfortunately, Mr. Keller, according to HOA guidelines, external fixtures must be approved by the board, especially those that alter the visual consistency of the neighborhood. The flag, while patriotic, falls under this regulation." I kept my voice calm. "I served 23 years in the Army. That flag was with me through 5 deployments. It's not a decoration. It's a part of who I am." A murmur passed through the small crowd. Karen blinked once slowly. "I respect your service, Mr. Keller, but rules are rules." I turned to the other 2 board members. "Did either of you vote on this fine?" Rick shifted uncomfortably. I wasn't really aware of the issue until just now, actually." Marlene looked up from her phone. "I thought we only voted on structural changes like fences and patios." Karen's smile cracked for just a second. "Well, I felt it was necessary to take preemptive action before it became a larger issue." "So you fine me unilaterally?" I asked. Karen's voice sharpened. "As president, I have the authority to issue fines in urgent cases. And flying a flag is urgent." Karen looked around the room as if searching for support. "There are guidelines, Mr. Keller. You agreed to them when you moved in." "I bought the house while I was stationed overseas. My wife signed the paperwork. I didn't agree to silence my patriotism." Several people in the room nodded and murmured in agreement. A woman in the back said loud enough to hear, "Let the man fly his flag." Karen banged a gavel she had brought from home, which wasn't necessary, and said, "Order, please. We'll take this under further review." Meeting adjourned. I walked out before she finished her sentence. The next morning there was a new letter taped to my garage. This time not from the HOA. It was from Karen herself. It was handwritten in perfect cursive on a card with flowers printed along the edge. Said, "Dear Mr. Keller, while I appreciate your past service, I must remind you that our community rules are in place for a reason. Exceptions lead to disorder, and I hope you can understand the importance of consistency. Please consider removing the flag until the board has officially voted. Sincerely, Karen Simmons, HOA President. P.S. The flagpole is also potentially damaging the exterior structure. That was the moment I decided this wouldn't end quietly. I called my lawyer. I called the local veterans organization. And I called the local news. By that weekend, a small news van was parked on my street. I didn't want attention, but I knew that silence would only let this kind of nonsense fester. The reporter was a young man named Tyler who had a microphone in one hand and a tired look in his eyes. He set up a quick interview on my front lawn. The flag waved above us during the entire segment. So you're being fined for flying an American flag? Tyler asked. That's right, I said. By the HOA. Because it doesn't match the aesthetic. Because it wasn't pre-approved. But really because someone thinks their authority is more important than my freedom. Do you think it's personal? I think it's about control. And I think some people don't like to be reminded that freedom wasn't given freely. The segment aired that evening. It wasn't long. Maybe 3 minutes. But it caught fire online. Messages started pouring in. From fellow veterans, from neighbors, from people across the country. Supportive messages. Offers for legal help. Photos of others flying their flags in solidarity. Karen was furious. She marched up to my front door the next day around 8 a.m. pounding on it like she was trying to break in. I opened it and she didn't even say hello. You embarrassed this community, she snapped. You made us look like tyrants. You embarrassed yourself, I said. I didn't make you write that fine or send that letter. You could have handled this quietly. You could have respected the flag. We stood there staring at each other. Her lips tightened. You've turned this into a circus. I have real responsibilities, Mr. Keller. I'm trying to keep this neighborhood from turning into chaos. Flying a flag is chaos. You know what I mean. I do, I said. And I don't care. I'll see you at the next meeting. And I did. But this time I didn't come alone. The community center was packed wall to wall. People who never attended these meetings showed up. Veterans in uniform, parents with kids, local press, and even a couple of council members. The atmosphere was electric. I waited while Karen tried to run the meeting as normal, but her voice was shaky and her hand kept fidgeting with her necklace. Eventually she got to the item labeled Resident Noncompliance Review. Karen started with her usual lines. The importance of order. The need for uniform standards. The dangers of exceptions. I stood up and walked to the front. The crowd got quiet. I'm not here just for myself, I said. I'm here because this flag means something. Not just to me, but to every person who ever held a rifle in the dirt wondering if they'd see home again. To every family who watched their loved one deploy and prayed they'd come back. This flag is not a lawn ornament. It's a promise. And if anyone thinks a homeowners association can override that promise, then they're the problem, not the flag. There was silence for a moment. Then clapping. Then a standing ovation. Karen didn't speak again for the rest of the meeting. But I knew she wasn't done. She never is. And this battle was far from over. It had been 3 days since the HOA meeting and the fallout was still echoing through the neighborhood like thunder after a lightning strike. The video of my speech had gone viral. News channels picked it up and ran short segments about the veterans standing up to the HOA over the American flag. I was invited to speak on a local radio show. Emails kept flooding in. My porch was full of thank you notes and hand-delivered letters from strangers. Some people left little American flags in my front yard. Others tied ribbons to my fence. Veterans from nearby towns drove in to shake my hand and take pictures in front of the flag. There were moments when I felt like it had gone too far, that it wasn't about me at all anymore. But the truth was it never really had been. My wife Mary kept the coffee pot full and the door open to anyone who stopped by. She had been quiet about the whole thing, but I knew her well enough to see the tension in her jaw and the weight in her eyes. She didn't like conflict. She liked peace. But she stood by me even when the storm started to darken our doorstep. On the 4th morning I got another letter. This time not taped to the door. It was mailed in a certified envelope with legal language on the outside. I sat on the porch and opened it slowly. The letter came from a law firm representing the HOA. It claimed that I was in violation of HOA rules regarding unapproved structures and that if I did not remove the flag and pole within 7 business days, the HOA would begin legal action, including a lien on my home. They included copies of bylaws and cited obscure clauses about architectural conformity and sightline interference. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. They had decided to escalate. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. Her name was Tara and she had the calm voice of someone who had won more fights than she'd lost. I faxed her the letter and she called me back 20 minutes later. This is a classic scare tactic, she said. They're betting you'll cave before it goes to court. What's our move? We respond. Firmly. She said. There's federal law that protects your right to fly the American flag. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005. It says they can't prevent you from displaying it on your property as long as it's displayed properly and safely. Which yours is. Let me draft a reply. Do what I said. Later that evening while we were sitting on the back patio eating dinner, Mary looked at me over her glass of tea. You know this isn't just about the flag anymore, right? I nodded. I know. It's about people like Karen thinking they can bend the world to fit their own rules. She doesn't care about the flag. She cares about control. Mary gave a small nod. Then she smiled faintly. Still, I'm proud of you. Even if I wish it didn't have to turn into a war. I squeezed her hand. Me too. The next day Tara sent the response to the HOA's law firm. It was short and sharp and left no room for interpretation. She quoted the law in full, provided photographs of my flag and its mounting, and included witness statements from neighbors confirming it posed no safety hazard or visual obstruction. I thought that might be the end of it. But Karen doesn't know how to quit. By the weekend, new signs were posted around the neighborhood. Official-looking notices with the HOA logo warning residents against unapproved exterior displays and encouraging them to report violations. The language wasn't specifically about flags, but the timing made it clear. Then the emails started going out. Karen sent them from the HOA email list. She accused me of dragging the community into unwanted media attention. She said our property values were at risk because of ongoing legal conflict. She said neighbors were frightened by the rise in strangers visiting the street. She never mentioned my name, but everyone knew who she meant. Mark next door knocked on my door that afternoon holding his phone. You see this crap, he said. I saw it. She's losing her mind. Yeah, but she's still dangerous. You need backup. I've got it, I said quietly. He frowned. What do you mean? You'll see. The next board meeting was 2 weeks later. I showed up early and waited in the parking lot. At first it was just a few neighbors. Then more cars rolled in. By the time the meeting started, the room was packed again. But this time it wasn't just neighbors. 12 veterans from the local VFW chapter arrived wearing their caps and jackets. A retired Navy commander. A pair of Marines. Even an old Air Force pilot in a wheelchair. They stood behind me like an unshakable wall. Karen looked up when they entered and her eyes went wide. I walked to the front as soon as the meeting opened and handed out copies of the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act to the board members. I had printed 20 of them just in case. You can't threaten people with legal action when federal law protects them, I said loud enough for everyone to hear. And you can't use this HOA to push your personal agenda. Karen opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. You want to talk about property values? Look around. You've turned this community into a battlefield. You want to talk about unity? Start respecting the people who fought for it. You want to lead? Then start listening. A voice from the back shouted, That's right. Another yelled, We support you, John. Rick, the sleepy board member, cleared his throat. Maybe we should reconsider the fine. Marlene nodded. I moved to rescind the fine and formally recognize the display as compliant with federal law. Karen tried to speak again, but the motion was seconded and voted on before she could finish. The fine was gone. Officially. But I wasn't finished. I'd like to propose a new motion, I said. That the HOA adopt a resolution acknowledging residents' rights to fly the American flag in accordance with federal law, and that no fine shall ever be issued for such displays in the future. There was a pause. Then someone from the crowd said seconded. Marlene looked around. All in favor. Every hand went up except Karen's. The motion passed. After the meeting, Karen cornered me in the hallway. Her face was red and her voice low. You think you've won, but all you've done is cause chaos. I looked her dead in the eye. No. I stopped you from causing more. You embarrassed me, she hissed. You embarrassed yourself. She stepped closer. This isn't over. I smiled. Then I suggest you learn the law before trying again. The veterans behind me didn't say a word. They just stood there watching. Silent reminders of the line she had crossed. For a few days things were quiet. Karen stopped sending emails. The signs came down. The tension in the neighborhood began to ease. Kids played outside again. People waved as they passed by. The flag stayed up. But I knew better than to get comfortable. Because when people like Karen lose a battle, they don't go away. They plot the next one. And I was ready. A month passed. The flag still flew. The sun rose and fell like normal, the lawnmowers buzzed, the kids biked around the cul-de-sacs, and for a while it felt like maybe the dust had finally settled. But the thing about quiet in places like this is it rarely means peace. Sometimes it means someone is getting ready to strike again. Karen hadn't been to the last 2 board meetings. She'd stopped walking her usual evening lap around the neighborhood. Her porch lights were off every night. Most people assumed she was embarrassed, still licking her wounds from the public shaming, but I knew better. Karen wasn't the kind to hide. If she was quiet, she was planning. It started again on a Thursday morning. My neighbor Mark came over holding his phone out like it was a piece of evidence. "You seen this?" he asked. I took the phone. It was a screenshot of a message posted on a private neighborhood forum Karen had created back when she took over the HOA board. She had titled it Community Watch Council. The post was recent and full of vague warnings about residents who were threatening the harmony and safety of the neighborhood. It didn't mention me by name. But it didn't have to. Then came the anonymous letters. 3 of them showed up in my mailbox over the course of the week, typed on plain paper, no return address, no signature. Each one talked about how I had drawn unwanted attention to the neighborhood, how some of the newer residents felt unsafe, how some were considering selling their homes. I knew the tone. It was Karen's voice, even behind the mask of anonymity. I brought the letters inside and tossed them on the kitchen counter. Mary picked them up one by one, reading in silence. She finally looked up. "She's trying to bait you." "I know. So what do? We wait." Mary raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound like you." "Because I'm not waiting to be passive," I said. "I'm waiting because sometimes the best way to win is to let someone show the world how petty they really are." The next week a new HOA proposal showed up in the monthly bulletin. It wasn't listed as targeting flags, but it was suspiciously titled Regulation of Permanent and Semi-Permanent Exterior Displays. The language was legalistic, full of vague references to structural additions and property conformity. Hidden in the middle was a new rule about flagpole mounts being subject to quarterly inspection by the board. Mark stormed into my garage that night, furious. "She's at it again," he said, slamming the bulletin down on my workbench. "She's trying to bury it under all the other noise, but it's obvious." "I know. Are you going to the vote?" "I'm going to do more than that," I said. Over the next few days I called every single veteran I had met during the earlier conflict. I called other residents who had expressed their support. I contacted a few legal advisors I knew through Tara. We put together a presentation. One that couldn't be ignored. The night of the vote the meeting room was once again packed. But this time something was different. There were camera crews. Local reporters. Even a representative from the state's Office of Veterans Affairs stood in the back, quietly observing. Karen sat at the front as if she hadn't been absent for a month, her hair done up in curls and her outfit pristine. She looked like she was about to host a fundraising gala, not lead a neighborhood meeting. "We begin tonight with a discussion of proposed updates to exterior compliance policies," she said in her usual clipped tone. "These are important steps to ensure the continued visual integrity of our community." I raised my hand before she could keep talking. "I'd like to request that the board allow a rebuttal from the residents since this proposal affects us directly." Karen narrowed her eyes. "You'll have 3 minutes." I stepped forward. Behind me stood a line of veterans and neighbors holding printed packets of the proposal with key sections highlighted. "This proposal is not about safety or aesthetics," I said. "It's about control. It's a veiled attempt to reintroduce restrictions that were already overturned. The language may seem neutral, but the intent is clear. You're not regulating property, you're trying to suppress individual rights under the guise of uniformity." Someone in the back shouted, "He's right." Another yelled, "Shame on you." Karen tried to bang her gavel, but the noise didn't stop. She looked nervous. Her eyes darted around the room. I handed out copies of the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act again. Then I showed a chart illustrating how many homes in the neighborhood already had minor unapproved fixtures, lawn gnomes, solar lights, porch swings that had never once been fined or questioned. I passed around a folder of photographs of those homes. Every one of them untouched by the HOA. And every one of them belonged to residents Karen liked. The hypocrisy was impossible to ignore. The representative from the Office of Veterans Affairs finally stepped forward. She introduced herself as Rachel Jennings. She was calm but firm. "I'm here tonight to observe, but I want to remind the board that federal protections for flag displays are not optional. Any attempt to subvert or sidestep those protections through policy manipulation may invite legal scrutiny." The room went silent. Karen sat stiffly, her face pale. Rick mumbled, "I vote against the proposal." Marlene nodded. "Same." The vote failed. Karen tried to speak again, but her voice caught. She excused herself and left the room mid-meeting. Cameras followed her out, but she refused to answer questions. Later that night someone egged my house. I didn't see who did it. I only heard the noise, the splatter on the siding, the squeal of tires peeling off down the street. Mary and I came outside and just stood there under the light of the porch with the flag above us and eggs dripping down the windows. The next morning Karen posted on the forum again accusing me of stirring up division, bringing unwanted attention to the neighborhood and suggesting that residents should start a petition to limit how long flags could remain outside without renewal. She was losing, but she was still swinging. I cleaned the eggs off my house and repainted part of the siding. Mary helped. Mark brought over his pressure washer. The neighborhood quietly watched. Then something strange happened. A few days later, 20 houses in the neighborhood raised flags. Not just American flags but POW, MIA banners, Marine Corps flags, Army, Navy, Coast Guard. One even raised a flag with the words "Land of the Free" because of the brave hand painted on a bedsheet. It was quiet rebellion. Beautiful and bold. Karen's porch remained bare. The next board meeting came around and Karen didn't show up. She resigned 2 days later. The email was brief and without apology. She claimed she was stepping down due to personal matters and that she hoped the community would heal from the recent tensions. Nobody clapped. Nobody sent her flowers. She just vanished. The board elected a new president. A quiet woman named Elaine who had never raised her voice in any meeting but who spoke with calm clarity and genuine care. The new board passed a resolution that made it clear residents could fly any recognized national or military flag without HOA approval or interference. They posted it on the bulletin and online. Simple and clear. It felt like the end. But I knew Karen wasn't the type to give up completely. People like her don't vanish. They regroup. They wait. And so I stayed ready. Because I had learned that sometimes the fight to protect freedom doesn't come from foreign soil. Sometimes it starts right in your own front yard. After Karen resigned, the neighborhood breathed easier. It was like someone had cracked a window in a room that had been shut too long. People waved more. Conversations lasted longer. The complaints slowed. No more surprise letters. No more sudden fines. For the first time in months it felt like things were finally back to normal. The flag still flew from my porch. Mark started bringing over coffee every morning just to sit and chat before work. We would talk about everything but what had happened. Not because we were afraid of it but because it no longer needed to be spoken aloud. The flag was still up. That was the only answer that mattered. But even peace can be uneasy. One afternoon while Mary was out shopping and I was trimming the hedges, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked just beyond the entrance to our street. It wasn't there long. Maybe 10 minutes. Just sat there, engine off, windows up. Then it turned around and left. The next day it came back again. I wrote down the license plate. 3 days later we started getting calls. First it was a local landscaping service asking if I wanted an estimate on removing my flagpole. I told them no. Then a private security company left a voicemail saying they had been contacted about helping me reduce the foot traffic around my home. I hadn't contacted anyone. I hadn't requested any service. I asked Tara to check the number on the license plate. She had a few friends who owed her favors. By the end of the week she called me. The car was registered to a man named Anthony Simmons, Karen's cousin. He had a record of filing nuisance lawsuits against small businesses in 3 counties. She said he was known for threatening legal action then settling for cash just to avoid the hassle. He wasn't a lawyer but he knew how to act like one. Looks like Karen brought in reinforcements, she said. Let her try, I said. She lost already. Tara's voice dropped. John, people like that don't come to fight clean. Be ready. I was. That weekend the car came back. This time it didn't park at the entrance. It pulled right up in front of my house and sat there for over an hour. I sat on the porch and stared at the windshield. He didn't get out. Just stared back. Eventually he drove off again. The next morning I got a notice from a firm in the city. It wasn't a lawsuit, not yet, but it was a warning. A pre-litigation demand letter. It claimed that the display of the flagpole posed a risk to neighborhood children due to its height and location. That the pole could fall during a storm and cause injury. That my prior military background created an intimidating atmosphere for some residents and contributed to emotional distress. I handed the letter to Mary. She read it twice then quietly walked into the house. I heard a drawer open and close. When she came back she was holding a photo album. She sat down beside me and flipped to a page near the back. It was a photo of me holding our daughter just after my final deployment. Behind us the flag waved proudly on a different house in a different town. This has always been your right, she said. You don't back down now. I called Tara. She had already seen the letter. She was already preparing the response. A few days later while Mary and I were out having dinner someone left a stack of papers on our porch. Flyers. They looked official at first glance. HOA logo at the top. But they were full of lies. They said I had refused safety inspections. That I had intimidated board members. That I was disrupting the neighborhood for personal glory. That my flag was a weapon of division, not unity. I collected the flyers and took them to the board. Elaine was furious. "This didn't come from us," she said. "We never approved this language. We would never say that." I knew that. But it needed to be said out loud. So we made a plan. Elaine agreed to host a community-wide town hall. No agenda. No policies. Just a night for people to speak. To ask questions. To clear the air. And if Karen's allies tried anything, they'd have to do it in front of the whole neighborhood. We posted notices. We spread the word. We invited the local press again. The night of the meeting, the room was packed tighter than ever. Standing room only. Neighbors sat on window sills lined the walls, stood in the back. I stood off to the side quietly watching as people filed in. Elaine stepped up to the front and welcomed everyone. She opened the floor. And then something happened I didn't expect. People started talking. One by one. A young mother stood up and said she used to be afraid of walking her daughter past my house because of the conflict. But now she walked by every day and the flag made her feel safe. An older man said he had never spoken up before because he didn't want drama. But he had served in Korea and seeing that flag reminded him of his brothers. A teenager said he used to think flags were just fabric, but now he understood what they meant to people who had actually earned them. And then someone unexpected stood up. It was Lisa, Karen's former friend. The woman who used to host book clubs with her and organize bake sales. She looked nervous, but her voice was strong. "I was friends with Karen for years," she said. "And I believed what she told me about the flag at first. That it was a violation. That it would bring trouble. But I was wrong. She wasn't trying to protect the neighborhood. She was trying to control it. And when she couldn't, she brought in someone else to fight her battles." Gasps rippled through the room. Lisa continued. "The flyers that went out last week came from Anthony Simmons. Karen asked him to print them. I saw the email. I didn't say anything before. But I can't stay silent now." Elaine asked her to forward the email. She agreed. "I didn't say anything that night. I didn't have to. The truth had been spoken by others." The next morning I found another envelope on my porch. But this time it wasn't a threat. It was a petition signed by over 80% of the neighborhood. Read. "We, the residents of this community, stand in support of the right to fly the American flag on personal property in accordance with federal law. We condemn all attempts to intimidate, harass, or misrepresent those who exercise this right. We stand with John Keller." I didn't cry often. But that morning I sat on the porch with that letter in my hand and the flag waving gently above me, and I cried. Mary sat beside me quietly holding my hand. We didn't say a word. Later that week Anthony Simmons left town. No lawsuit was filed. No calls came. Karen's forum disappeared. Her house went up for sale. A new family moved into her home a month later. They planted a small garden. Put up a birdhouse. And on their porch flew a brand new American flag. And for the first time in a long time I felt something settle deep in my chest. Something like victory. Summer arrived gently that year. It rolled in on warm breezes and long golden evenings, the kind of weather that reminds you why you chose to live where you live. My porch was freshly stained, the grass neatly trimmed, the flag still flew where it had always been, firmly anchored in the brick and steel that had been tested and proven through months of resistance. It had been weeks since Karen's house sold and she vanished from the neighborhood. Her cousin Anthony hadn't returned and there had been no further legal letters or petty threats. The flyers stopped, the anonymous notes stopped. The HOA had revised its rules and added language that would protect the right to fly a flag for any homeowner without question or interference. It was official, written into the community charter. There were moments I thought about Karen, mostly when I passed her old house or when someone brought her name up in a whisper, but more often I thought about what came after her, the quiet strength of my neighbors, the boy who walked past my flag every morning and saluted with his tiny hand, the couple across the street who had added a flagpole just last week. Their banner waved in sync with mine like two hearts beating in rhythm. But victory comes with a strange feeling, not always triumph, not always celebration. Sometimes it just feels like relief, like the breath you didn't realize you were holding finally escapes from your chest. Then came the letter from Washington. It arrived in a plain envelope with a return address from the Department of Veterans Affairs. At first I thought it was routine, maybe something about a benefit or a form I had forgotten, but when I opened it I saw a handwritten note on heavy cardstock. It was signed by a senator, a veteran himself. He had seen the story online, had watched the clips, read the articles, and reached out personally. Said, "Mr. Keller, thank you for standing up not just for yourself but for every veteran and every American who believes in what that flag represents. Your story has reminded us what service really means, not just overseas but here at home too. You held the line. With respect and gratitude, Senator James Holloway, United States Marine Corps, retired." It was a simple note, but it struck deeper than anything else. Had I showed it to Mary and she smiled and then framed it and hung it just inside the front door beside a photograph of me in uniform the day I retired. One morning in late July, the local school invited me to speak at their summer assembly. A teacher had seen the news and thought it would mean something to the kids. I didn't want to make a big speech. I didn't think of myself as a hero or someone with wisdom to hand out, but I agreed. I stood in front of a gym full of 4th and 5th graders and told them about the flag, about how I carried it in my pocket through dust storms and firefights, about how I watched it rise at dawn in places where we didn't know if we'd make it to dusk, about how I came home to find that sometimes the hardest fights weren't behind you but waiting on your lawn in the shape of something as small as a rulebook. They listened. Some of them didn't understand all the words, but they understood the feeling. One boy raised his hand and asked, "Did you ever feel scared?" I nodded. "Every day, but I kept going anyway. That's what courage is." Afterward, a few kids came up to shake my hand and thank me. One of them gave me a little paper flag he had colored with crayons. I kept it. I still have it taped on the fridge. The months passed. Fall came. Leaves turned red and gold and began to fall across the yard. I installed a light beneath the flag to keep it lit at night in accordance with proper protocol. Every evening it glowed softly in the dark, a quiet statement of what had been earned and what would never be taken away. Elaine, the new HOA president, continued to do her job well. She was fair, respectful, thoughtful. She made sure the community stayed clean and safe, but never overstepped. She even sent out a newsletter one month thanking residents for their unity and resilience during what she called a challenging chapter. Mark and I still met for coffee most mornings on the porch or in the garage, depending on the weather. We didn't talk about Karen anymore. We didn't need to. One afternoon he said something that stuck with me. "You know, John, that flag up there, it isn't just a win for you, it's a win for all of us, for everybody who ever had someone tell them to sit down and stay quiet when they knew they were right." He wasn't wrong. What started as a fine turned into a movement. What began as one voice grew into a community that stood tall together. And even though Karen was gone, her shadow had made something stronger, a neighborhood that no longer followed blindly, a place where people knew they had a voice and the power to use it. I received an invitation that winter to speak at the state capitol during a ceremony honoring veterans. They asked me to share my story again, not as a warning but as a testament to what one person can do when they refuse to back down. I stood on that stage beneath a larger flag, one that rippled in the cold wind, and I spoke plainly. I told them I never wanted to be in the spotlight. I just wanted to fly the flag I had served beneath and beside. I told them about the fine, about the meetings, about the pressure to quit, and I told them about the people who stood up around me, the ones who said no more. When I stepped off that stage, a man in a wheelchair rolled up to me. He had lost both legs in Vietnam. He looked up at me and said, "You didn't just fight for the flag, you reminded people why it's worth fighting for." That was the moment I realized the story was bigger than I thought. Not because of me, but because of what the flag really is. It's more than stripes and stars. It's every sacrifice, every oath, every goodbye at an airport. It's every night spent in a barack, every morning under foreign skies wondering if the world still remembered. And sometimes remembering starts with a single house on a quiet street and one man who says enough. Today the flag still flies on my porch. It will keep flying as long as I live, and when I'm gone my daughter will raise it and her children after that. Because the right to fly it is not just mine. It's all of ours. And as long as it waves, we are reminded not of a fight with a neighbor or a board meeting or a fine, but of what it means to stand firm when others want you to fall silent. It means freedom. It means service. It means home. Do you think that flag should always fly free? Then make your voice count. Like the video. Subscribe to HOA Confidential. And join the fight against HOA injustice.